Hi, I'm John Ray, and welcome to the Thriving Podcast. I'm your host and intuitive coach, dedicated to amplifying your intuition, transforming your mind, and igniting your inner magic to create a life you're obsessed with. 2 years ago, I was burnt out as fuck in a toxic relationship and a successful tech career that I just wasn't happy in anymore. I left it all behind with no plan, and now I'm running my own business, immersed in purpose and passion, happily married to my soulmate, and living out my dreams every single day. And if you're badass enough to be listening to this podcast, then you're already on the fast track to doing the same, babe. On this podcast, we'll dive into all things life, business, heart, mind, body, and soul, empowering you to up-level your life and embody your happiest, healthiest, and hottest self. It's time to make idealistic your new realistic, because you're not just here to survive, you're here to thrive. Hello. Welcome back to the podcast, episode 11. I saw a statistic the other day that was like I'm going to mess it up now. What was the statistic? I don't know why I was like, let me share the statistic and just like assume that I'm going to completely remember what it was off the top of my head. It was like 90% of podcasters or people who start a podcast don't make it past episode 21. I think that's what it was. I'm trying to search now. Yeah. 90% of podcasts don't. Oh, no, just kidding. It was 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. Of the remaining 10%, 90% don't make it to episode 20. So if you get to episode 21, you were in the top 1% of episode producers. Now, I will say that I remembered hearing this statistic somewhere, and so I Googled it to figure out, like, to see what the numbers were. And the article I found that shared what I just read, he was like, basically, he was like, I heard this statistic somewhere and I'm not sure like how accurate, like, or where it came from. So don't believe everything you read on the internet, but I'm going to go with it. Sounds legit to me. And I love it because if that's the case, then we're in episode 11. We're already over halfway to being in the top 1% of podcast episode producers. So how dope is that? All right. So I've had a very busy week this week. And as you'll see in the episode, I touch on this at the end, but it's really wasn't actually that busy. It was just like busier than usual, right? But I had a lot of calls, especially because with the Hot Girl CEO Summer Accelerator, you guys know, if you follow me on Instagram, and also I've been talking about it on the podcast, like it's all I've been talking about because I'm obsessed and we are right in the middle of it. And it is an accelerator. So like it's a lot, it's really accelerating for the girls, but it's also for me because we have like daily voice note trainings. And by the way, in the last episode, I think I told you that I couldn't figure out what to call them. We decided to call them daily vitamins, like take your daily vitamins. And it's so cute. And I'm literally obsessed. But anyway, so I've been like dropping that for them daily. And it's essentially, okay, my plan, which this will probably not surprise many of you, but my initial plan was like, yeah, like 10 to 15 minute training a day, maybe 20 minute. And they're 20 minutes minimum, like every day. And so like major props to my girls because they are seriously going all in. They are so committed. They are so engaged. They're really, just like committing to keeping up on them and doing all the integration exercises. And they've had so many incredible wins. I swear to God, like every single day. I texted Sindri today and I was like, just every day there's something new for me to like cry about, like cry of joy and gratitude because I'm just so happy like how at peace they're feeling. Like literally just like quantum leaping on our calls, just feeling so cleared out and so much lighter and so much calmer and giving so much more compassion to themselves and feeling so much more inspired, seeing more results, getting more engagement, more followers with less work, being so much more easeful, like letting stress bounce off of them, cutting out the noise, connecting more to their intuition, really giving themselves permission to own their desires, shifting into overflow and abundance, and really making energetic shifts to align to the frequency of making more money and allowing yourself to make more money and really like, stepping into that embodied identity of a wealthy woman or of a successful business owner. We've done so much work with like feeling deserving of success in your business and, breaking through that self-sabotage and cementing healthy habits and like really setting a solid foundation of health and balancing masculine and feminine energy and embracing structure and flow and allowing yourself to flow within healthy structure and integrating routines. And it's just like been insane and incredible. And so, on that note of structure and routine and flow, what I decided to do for today's podcast episode, because I did not have the energy to record an episode this week because I've had just calls every single day, and I normally don't have calls every day, and I purposely don't, as I talk about in the episode, it's very relevant. I purposely don't schedule like calls and podcasts on the same day because I'm very mindful of like how much energy these things are going to take, and of like not, scheduling like 4 hours of things where I'm just going to be talking and like channeling and like, using a lot of energy. So I was going to record the podcast today because I have my calls later in the day and I only had 2 of them. But then I just like got super tired. I've been doing a lot of energy work recently too, which was like not necessarily the best timing on my part. I had a spinal energetics appointment on Monday. So I've been kind of having like detox symptoms. Like if you've ever done really intense energy work, you understand what I'm talking about. So I was like super tired in midday and I had to like just basically like tend to my energy. And I was like, well, no time to record a podcast. But I had already been toying with the idea of I was going to wait until the accelerator was over and just pull basically like my favorite training or the girl's favorite training, like, or one that felt really powerful that I thought would like really be beneficial to bring to my podcast fam and just like upload it as a podcast episode. Because honestly, like they're all so freaking good. And I'm like, man, like I wish I could bring these all to the podcast. So this will be just kind of a taste for everyone that's not in the program of really the kind of value that you get. So yeah, basically this was day 5 and there was overwhelming like response in their halfway check-in forms in the chat of just like, oh my God, this was mind-blowing. This was so good. And yeah, I've talked about this in different pieces. Like if you were here for Flow into Focus that I did back in February, I talked about some of these things and it really lands with people. And I feel like it's been coming up a lot. I've been seeing like even more of a need for this kind of perspective on time and energy management and kind of everything under that umbrella. So basically this was day 5 and it was actually like 3 separate audios. The one I got cut off in the middle of it, but I tried to like kind of edit and cut out the parts basically that like would be confusing to you because you're not on the program, like any specific references I made to things that wouldn't make sense because you're not in the program. So like there might be like a couple choppy edits in places, so just like ignore that. But yeah, so I put them all together into kind of one overall episode whose theme is really time management, energy management, scheduling, ADHD, productivity, focus, procrastination, motivation, healthy structure and routine, and really how to flow intuitively, but also allow that intention and that healthy structure and support and how to really integrate those 2 things together. Because I know that's something that a lot of us can find challenging, and I definitely found this challenging, is like, I'm a flowy person and I get this idea and then I want to do that and then I want to do this, and like I like to feel like I'm just flowing and like doing my own thing and like I'm free to do that, and I don't want to feel like nailed down and trapped with a structure or routine, right? And so we have a line here about really, one, how to kind of shift your perspective on that and shift like, kind of look at your relationship with structure and routine. This is something that I even realized recently, that I was having resistance to really embracing more structure and routine because I still had this subconscious thing of like tying it back to when I was at my 9 to 5. And I was like, oh my God, like if I bring that structure back, I'm going to feel so trapped. And so we talk about really like healing that relationship. We talk about really kind of how to hack it and how to, you guys know my thing is like lead with intuition always, like in business especially. It's not that I don't use strategy or that I'm against strategy, but I'm very, very passionate about intuition first, lead from intuition, and then filter it through a strategic lens. And so this is kind of applying that concept and that approach and perspective to scheduling, basically, like intuitive scheduling. And how can I tap into intuition and my own intuitive flow but then kind of give it that healthy support. And again, like filter it through that more logical, strategic, structured lens. So you're going to see what I mean when I talk about it. I really go into like all the hacks that I have come up with, that I have used and integrated, that have changed my life since realizing, like really since bringing awareness to the way my brain works. Like if you want to say ADHD, if you want to say super creative, intuitive, like however you view it, if you don't, identify or relate or resonate with the term ADHD, I imagine a lot of this will still probably resonate with you if you feel like you struggle with staying on task, staying focused, motivation, procrastination, just like, yeah, like integrating routine and structure into your day. So it's a hefty episode. Like I said, it moves fast. And just another side note, I'm on a walk when I'm giving them this training. So the audio is like I'm talking a little bit, like my pitch is higher and I'm like a little bit more like breathless. I think it sounds fine. Like you'll get used to it, but just a warning, it's probably not going to sound like, there will be a shift probably in the energy and like the tone and the quality of my voice and my speech. But yeah, it does move fast. I would honestly recommend, like, this is when you're probably going to want to take notes on or like listen to multiple times, because there's a lot and it's literally like my handbook to seriously, yeah, scheduling, intuitive scheduling, and productivity, focus, motivation, procrastination. Like it's got everything and it packed into this episode. And I also posted about this on my stories the other day about, my method of prioritizing and deprioritizing, like consciously deprioritizing. And that got a lot of great response too. And so, yeah, I really just wanted to bring this to the podcast because it's so valuable. One last thing I will say, I really should have consciously tried to do a shorter intro for this since the episode is so meaty, but that's okay. You guys, you like a good meaty episode. Last thing I will say is I do reference at one point this concept of keeping your light on. I don't know if I've talked about it on the podcast before. I have posted a TikTok about this before, but long and short of it is, just so that you understand what I'm referencing, is basically when it comes to manifestation and balancing masculine, feminine energy. I won't give the whole metaphor here because that was like a whole other training that I gave them. So I won't like go too extended in the whole metaphor, but basically I like to use this analogy of like, imagine you're like a lighthouse and you're holding up a light so that your manifestation can see like, oh, that's where I'm going. You call your manifestation in, universe is like, oh, John Marie's calling you in, manifestation, go on your way, right? And your manifestation is like coming to you, you're attracting it, right? And like you're holding that light up so it knows where to go. And that is like you in perfect balance, right? So it's like you have that effort. That's like the masculine, the yang energy of holding the light up. That requires effort, but you're not doing anything more. Like you're not jumping up and down with it. You're not like trying to climb up higher, making sure it can see. You're just trusting like this is enough. Me just holding this light up, that's enough. And I love like the kind of double meaning of like shining your light, right? Because it's so important of like, what vibe are you in? Like, what is your frequency? Like, are you in alignment? Are you listening to your intuition? Because we know that that's really what's most important at the end of the day, because energy speaks louder than words. But that's kind of what I was referencing. And basically the idea of like, finding that perfect balance of the masculine and the feminine energy of like, well, if you're too much in your feminine, you don't have that little bit of effort, you're going to be like on the ground, your light's not going to be up at all. Your manifestation's not going to know where to go. But on the flip side, if you're like doing too much and we're overworking, which is what so many of us can tend to do, then it's like, oh, like they can't see my light. What if they can't see? I need to get higher. I need to get bigger light. I need to do all this stuff. And then all the time you're spending worrying about like, oh my God, my light needs to be bigger. I need to make sure they can see it. Your light's actually not shining. You're not holding it up because you're so distracted by all the like BS and noise. It actually doesn't matter. And you're just like overworking yourself and not getting anywhere. So that's what I'm referencing when I reference keeping your light on or having your light up or however I reference it. All right. Enjoy the episode. It's just like so value packed. And so I really think you guys are going to get so much out of it. Yeah, that's all I'm going to leave it there. Let you get into the episode, transfer you over to past John Marie, and then I'll catch up with you in the outro. All right. Love you. All right. First thing that we need to basically look at when it comes to your to-do list and your schedule and your time management is basically like what you are managing and like what is on the list. Because essentially you have too many things that you're trying to prioritize, like we can't move on, right? Because realistically, you can only have a few priorities at a time to really focus your energy. We're just really not designed to be able to disperse our energy to that many things, or like to disperse that all in energy. So I like to say, like, I have my top 1 to 3 priorities, period, in life. And then I have my top 1 to 3 priorities underneath each of those. And you don't really want to let it grow past that. I like to give this analogy of, like, imagine you have all these little armies or all these little like energy dudes. I don't know what I'm looking for. And you're like sending them towards your goal. And so if you have like 7 different goals or 7 different tasks you're trying to accomplish and prioritize all at the same level, then you only have so many little energy armies you can send towards each goal, and you're not going to really make a ton of progress in any of them. Whereas opposed to if you bring that down to like 1 or 3 destinations, you have way more energy armies to send towards each one. That makes sense to everyone. I'm sure you've probably heard something similar about that before. So we have to really take an honest look at what we're prioritizing, what we're not prioritizing, and what is on our to-do list that is really a distraction more than serving our priorities. So the number one most important thing is get clear on your priorities. So like for me, my priorities are 1, me, like just my health, my wellness, me time, everything that falls under John Marie, my relationship or my relationships, right? Like, but then even within there, I have like primary relationships. So it's like my marriage, obviously, time with Sindri, and like my family, spending time with them. Sindri is really my main, like making time for him, especially since we're long distance. And then number 3 is my business. And those are really my top 3 priorities right now. Oh my God, I heard this TikTok the other day. Well, it was a while ago, actually. Someone sent it to me. And it was so perfect. I'm a license plate. It so perfectly described this. She's like, basically start talking to your friends, like updating your friends in terms of majoring and minoring. So it's like, I am majoring in my personal growth and health and wellness and minoring in, my business or whatever, right? And then I was like, you could do like double major, double minor, like minoring with a concentration, like you could get really fun and creative with it. So anyway, I had those 3 priorities, right? And then like underneath that, I have my main 1 to 3 priorities. So for like my personal stuff, it's like maybe my diet and or making time to exercise or working with a mentor or like whatever it is that I happen to be prioritizing, or maybe just like having me time is just a thing and I can fill in different things in there, whatever it is. For my business, this is where it gets really important because there can be so many things that we want to do eventually or that we feel like we should be doing, right? And it's so important to not let yourself get lost in the sauce and lost in what should I be doing or what I think would be good, or things that I want to do eventually, but they're really honestly not a priority right now, and really, really get clear. So, example of this is like your priority in your business right now might just be like grow your community or like nurture your community. It might be get clients. And even within that, we can specify like book out my one-on-one, fill my group program. It might be just like create my offer. It might be just post consistently, like build a consistent habit of posting every day, or a habit of selling consistently, of selling every day on my stories or showing up on my stories. Or it might be like starting my podcast. So these are all different kinds of priorities we can have in business, and what your current priorities in business are really going to depend on, where you are at in your business. And again, like what your true intuitive desires and priorities are. And like, for example, when I really wanted to launch my podcast, I had it on my to-do list for a while, and I had to kind of acknowledge, because I was like in the middle of launching another program and I had a lot going on and the podcast kept falling, but I still had it on my list and I kept pushing it. And then what happens is when you have things on the list that aren't actually priority and then you keep pushing them, they're basically just stressing you out unnecessarily that entire time. Because they're on your mind, they're contributing to overwhelm because you see this thing on your list that you're not going to do and you keep not doing it. And now you're casting votes to your brain that I don't do the things I say I'm going to do, right? And I don't have enough time and I can't get everything done and I'm behind, right? So we want to
get really, honestly realistic with our to-do list, which you guys know I use that word. When I use that word, I really mean it because I don't use that word lightly. And so it was so liberating for me when I took a look at my life. I was like, okay, I literally just don't have enough time for everything I want to do. Because when we have this feeling of like, I don't have enough time, it's either there are literally too many things that you're trying to do in too short of amount of time, or it's just a mindset thing, a perspective thing, or like an energy thing. So when you have the feeling of overwhelm, you have to really like take an honest look and be like, okay, like, am I trying to do too much? And what are my priorities? And so I know probably a lot of you will be able to relate to this, especially with the ADHD brain. We'll frequently end up with, a to-do list of just anything that came to my mind that I need to do, or I want to do, or I need to buy, or whatever, right? And then, I'll end up with so many things that then I'm like, okay, this is too much. And I like start a new list and I move all the really urgent things to that list. And I keep kind of like cascading and creating more lists. And I have all these lists all over. I have some written down. I have some in my phone. They're all over the place. And I lose sight of half the things. And then I feel overwhelmed because I know that those tasks and ideas are like sitting out there in the ether and they're unaddressed. And I still always have this huge to-do list that's stressing me out. So what I've started doing, so helpful, is I set aside an hour block on my calendar every week, same time every week, and it's a non-negotiable. It's just on there like a meeting, right? Just like you would do a money date or like even a meeting with a client or anything. And I set this on my calendar and I call it a DDD, which is, what does DDD stand for? Do, or DDDD maybe. It's like do, delay or delegate and delete, basically, or delete. I kind of made up this process and then someone told me that it exists with some other name. So I don't know. But basically, I made it up for myself when I implemented it. At that time, I go through my entire list, and if it's something that I can do in like 5 to 10 minutes or less, or maybe 20 minutes or less, like use your kind of judgment, like in the moment, then I just do it right away. And that's just the rule of that hour in the context of that hour. And it's like when I'm in that hour, it's like you kind of have more motivation to actually just do it because you're in the energy of that hour, if that makes sense. It's like not optional anymore. And the powerful thing is that when you sit down and you're like, oh, okay, this is something I can do right now, I have to do it. And you go send that email or you post that thing or you fill out that form, right? Then you start to build momentum and motivation, and the other tasks that you can do right away becomes so much easier, right? So it's really powerful to just set this intentional time to really get shit done, honestly. So if it is something you're able to do like within that hour pretty quickly, then you do it, right? If it's not, then you basically ask, okay, is this something that is a priority right now, right? Is this fall under my umbrella of priorities, or is it just something that, I want to do, but it's really not a priority right now? And depending on the answer, then you either move it to like a delay, basically, which is just like, I basically, another thing I should mention with this is since I've started intentionally doing this, I keep only 2 lists. And it's because I know I have this process in place, as where before something would pop into my head all of a sudden, and then I would just like write it down wherever I can remember, right? And I end up making all these lists. Because I have this intentional process, anything that comes up, it goes on the DDD list. It's just one list. And I go through this list and I basically like process this list and I address this list same time every week. So, and then the second list is basically like the delay DDD list, right? And honestly, you have to be a little ruthless with this one because you have to really be honest, like, okay, is this something I really like, it's gonna like be relevant within the next few months, right? Or is this something that maybe it's just a random thought that passed in my head, but it's really more of a distraction. And if it's that important, it'll come back up at a time when it is more of a priority to me. And in that case, you just delete it, right? And honestly, especially again with the ADHD brain, like half of the things that end up on my DDD list, I just delete when I get there. Cause I'm like, you know what? Do I really need to buy that? Do I really care about looking into that? No, not really. And I just delete it, right? And so there's do, delay, delete, or delegate, right? Which is basically if it's something that is more of a priority that you do like really need to get done or want to get done, but you can't do it within that hour, then you're going to go to your calendar again and set a specific time block and a specific plan of when you are going to do this thing. Another important, really, really important with this is when you do that delegation, make sure you allocate enough time. So I recommend, if you guys are like me, you're not super good at estimating how long things are going to take. So I recommend finding a time block and padding that by like at least an hour for whatever it is when you delegate that time. So for example, if you have on your DDD list, like go through my closet, and then you're like, okay, well, I can't do that right now, so I'm going to delegate a time for it. And you're like, how long will that take? I could probably knock that out in an hour. Like personally, I would probably put 3 hours on my calendar block for that. And if you get the time back, great, right? You manifest that time back. But it's so much better to allocate too much time than not enough, right? Because that's where the stress and the overwhelm comes from. So that's kind of how I go through the DDD process, and I highly, highly recommend it. When I do this, it just like helps decrease your stress so much throughout the week because, instead of having these things come up and then it's like one of two things happen. When you have the thoughts coming into your head all day long and ideas coming in all day long, right? Then one of two things happens. You end up with this like whole mess of lists and it's overwhelming, right? Or you're like, all right, I know that if I don't act on this right now, it's going to end up on a list somewhere, or I'm going to forget about it. So then that's how we end up distracted, right? And we end up like going from like this to this to this to this, right? Oh my God, today I literally took out cottage cheese and a banana for my lunch on the counter. And then I just somehow got completely distracted. Literally like an hour later, I was like, wow, I'm so hungry. And then I went back and I was like, oh, it's literally still sitting on the counter. I was like, how did I even get away from this? So if it's like, then we get distracted because we're like, okay, well, I know like it's not going to end up done if I don't do it now. And then we like lose that task that we were trying to focus on and we go to this one. So by having this process in place, idea popped in. I'm in the middle of a task right now, so I'm just going to put it on my DDD list. I know it's going to be addressed at a specific time, so now it's not stressing me, worrying of if I'm ever going to get to it or when am I going to get to it or I'm going to forget if I don't do it now, right? So, that's kind of my DDD process that I highly recommend. I feel like it's very helpful for ADHD, and it was life-changing for me when I implemented that. All right. Oh my God, so much to say. We're already at 16 minutes. This is like a beefy topic, you guys. All right, the second thing I wanted to say on that is in terms of when you delegate the tasks and just generally, like in general, when you're planning tasks and like planning out your to-do list for the day, is to be very mindful, not so much of your time management. I mean, yes, of your time management, but also of your energy management. I have this book, it's called Mind Management Over Time Management, and I highly recommend. I actually haven't finished it, but what I read of it was very valuable. And it's basically, so for example, you could look at how many hours you have in a day and be like, all right, well, this call will take 1 hour, this call will take 1 hour, and then recording this podcast episode will take an hour, and then making this piece of content will take, right? And we can be like, technically, I could fit these all in this hour. But you have to also take into consideration, what effect is this thing having on my energy and how much energy does this require of me? Because I know for me, if I put, like 2 client calls and a podcast recording on the same day, like that, I'm going to be so drained after, right? Like not that I'm not lit up and not that the calls and podcast recording is draining to me, but it's just a lot of talking, right? And it's a lot of energy and it's a lot of expression. And especially, like with these sessions, like I'm giving as much as I'm receiving, and so, in a podcast, like just talk, like think about even like when I like go and like talk with a friend, like get coffee with a friend for a few hours, like, yeah, that's totally expanding me. But at the same time, like I probably don't really want to do any more talking the rest of the day because my throat's going to be tired. So noticing things like that of like, what can I pair together in a way that makes sense and what gives me energy and what kind of like takes my energy or what even just like what kind of things do I need rest afterwards? Do I need kind of a recharge afterwards? And I kind of like to plan my day like strategically that way, right? Like, for example, I don't, as much as I can, I don't like to put calls back to back because I really like to be able to do some kind of energy reset or energy recharge before and after calls. So whether that's going for a walk or doing an NSDR or doing a literal like energy reset and energy clearing, I like to make sure that I can do that, because if I put calls back to back, I just know for me, I'm not going to be able to show up as well for my clients, and it's not going to be as serving to my energy. Something like going to the gym, like maybe going to the gym, you're like, okay, after I go to the gym, I just want to be done for the day, just know myself. Maybe going to the gym really pumps you up and you have a lot of energy after you go to the gym. So then maybe you want to put going to the gym somewhere in your day where you want that energy boost, like in the morning or in the middle of the day, right? Like for me, working out, I feel really motivated afterwards. So for that reason, I don't like to go too late in the day, because then like my energy is really up when I want to be winding down. So I like to do it earlier. Personally, I like can't really work out in the morning physically. Like I get nauseous when I work out in the morning. I don't know why. Anyone knows anything about that. So I can't work out right in the morning, but my ideal preferred time to like exercise is like in the middle of the day or like the early afternoon or late afternoon, like 3, whatever time that is. Because like I know like how it affects my energy, and I use that strategically in my day. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. I won't spend time on giving too many examples because this is already going to be really long training. But yeah, just being aware of like, like in general, I really like to block my days. And I do find again for like this, this way, if your energy works this way and your brain kind of works this way, like context switching is really harmful to your focus, because you need kind of a lot of time to get into that focus often. And you need, you need that intention around your focus. So like I don't do calls on Mondays. I often don't do calls on Fridays, but I will sometimes make exceptions. But I don't do calls on Mondays. So Monday is my day that I do all of my like biz admin and like behind the scenes planning and like computer work and things like that. Because I'm like, I know that I can knock a lot of that out at once, right? Because there's no social energy required or anything like that. I tend to put all my calls on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Thursday, but I make sure that they're spaced. And another thing is I'm very aware of a call where I am coaching others versus a call where I am with a mentor or being coached, or like example, when I go to therapy, right? Because I don't schedule anything else on those days. Because those can be like very draining and take a lot of energy. And I'm like, all right, this is just a healing day. And I make sure, like I learned the hard way. Don't think that I can go to therapy and then come home and record a podcast episode. And actually, sometimes I'll feel really energized after therapy, and then I do like pump out a bunch of content. But again, better to set the expectation lower rather than higher. Because what you don't want is to like be so wiped after a coaching session or after therapy and then be like, oh man, I really like planned to do this and now I have no energy for it. So it depends, but you know your energy and you kind of know like how different things affect you. And if you don't, right, then what I want you to start doing is just start to notice, how do these different things affect my energy, and how can I kind of like design my day in a way that really prioritizes energy balance, right? Like how can I pair something that requires a lot of energy from me with something that gives me a lot of energy, and how can I just be aware of this throughout my day? All right, so next thing, I was kind of just talking about this with the day blocking and the planning, but yeah, I guess I covered day blocking, but really like when you're planning these tasks, again, really pad the amount of time you're allocating for each thing. And this is where it comes back to the idea of it doing less and really paring down your list as much as possible. So coming back to business, with your business, I want you to literally just pick like 3 non-negotiables a day that you do for your business. So you're going to pick your top business priority. And I honestly would love for you guys to just start with your number 1 top priority. And again, you're all different places in your business. So if you feel like, I've got this down, like I could pick 2, trust yourself in your own process and where you're at. But pick your number 1 priority, right? And then pick your 3 business non-negotiables underneath that priority that you will do every single day. So that could look like, just one example, like sell in some way every day, which can look like so many things. We could talk about that. We have another training coming on sales energetics, and we could talk more about what sales looks like in general, but it could be like sell in some way every day, right? It could be post a piece of content every day. And it could be post something on my stories every day. There could even be overlap with those things. You could make a piece of content. You could put a cell in the caption and you could post that to your story. Bing, bang, boom. You got them all done. It might be all different kinds of things. It could be, I don't even know. It's going to depend on your business priorities. And I can help you guys figure that out. That's just one generic example. But you really, really want to just have those 3 non-negotiables. The theme with these non-negotiables, right? This is really the key, is you just keep building and layering in these non-negotiables. And that's really how you design your day and how you integrate these habits. And nothing beyond that, okay? So whatever else you feel like you need to do for your business, you got to get really honest with yourself. Well, is this in alignment with my priority, right? And if you feel like I have too many things and I don't know how to pare this down, come to me because I'm really good with this. And helping people, prioritize intuitively, basically. And another piece of this too is when you're looking at everything on your list and everything on your calendar, if you feel like you don't have enough time, again, being really honest with yourself of like, how many of these things am I dedicating my time and energy to because I want to, because this is an intuitive priority to me, or because I feel like I need to, or because I should, or out of obligation. Right? So when I started making this change, everything changed for me with my schedule and how much time I had, because there were so many things I was saying yes to when I really wanted to be saying no. So if that's something that resonates with you, really, really getting honest with, do I want to do this? Is this something that's worth my time and energy? Do I really want to do this? Or did I say yes when I should have said no? And really starting to set those boundaries with what you even offer up your time and energy to. Okay, so then once you have those non-negotiables, when it comes to literally planning your day, you guys are probably going to want to be taking notes on this. When it comes to actually planning your day, again, you want to really pad the time and also make sure that you plan in your breaks. All right, I used to plan my day and be like, yeah, that makes sense, like time-wise, energy-wise, but it's like I didn't plan in things like lunch, right? Or like going to the bathroom or things like that. So that's why it's so important to pad, but also just plan in intentional breaks. Again, watching that energy balance. So like if you think it's going to take you an hour to make a piece of content, plan for 2 hours, right? Because that's how we account for those little things that come up. And that's how we create just space in our day so we don't feel rushed, right? Because the thing with scheduling, right, is like we feel this aversion to this structure because we don't want to feel beholden to this very specific schedule and I have to get this done by this time, right? That's when it starts to feel restricting and then we resist it. So we want to feel like this structure is supporting our flow and not restricting our flow. And so this is going to be different for everyone. And I have this process that I use from time to time if I feel like I'm really getting off with my structure, and I call it structured flow. And essentially the long and short of it is I will make out a plan for my day based on everything I just talked about, and I'll try to make it as quote unquote realistic as possible. And then as I go through my day, I will just notice, okay, like how long did this actually take me? Or, after I did this, I noticed that I stalled and procrastinated for half an hour before this next thing, right? And I start to notice and I actually update my schedule to like how I really spent my time. And I'll do this throughout the week. And the important thing is to come at this with just a very curious approach. So we're not judging, I was supposed to get this done in this much time and it took me this much time. We're not judging, we're just gathering data. And so then at the end of the week, or even at the end of the day, depending, and again, when I first started doing this, I now have kind of a good idea based from actually going through this process. When I first started doing this, I also put a block of time on my calendar to do this assessment and kind of like schedule audit. So like at the end of the week, I'll look back on, what I had planned and then how I actually spent my time, and I'll assess based on that, right? So, okay, I noticed that I had allocated an hour for my content and it actually took me 2 hours, right? So then maybe next week I'm going to allocate 3 hours, or I'm going to be like, okay, well, why did it take me 2 hours? And how can I address it that way? So there's different ways when you go through this audit that you can kind of address, or maybe it's like, I realized because that wasn't really a priority to me and I was trying to do it. So maybe I take that off altogether, right? Or, one thing for me I noticed that I was just talking to you guys about is I noticed after a call, I would plan to make content right after the call. But then I would notice that after the call, I would kind of just scroll and text Sindri for like half an hour. And I noticed it was because like after a call, I want a break. I want a little recharge. I don't want to go right into more work. So now I intentionally, plan in that recharge time after calls because I know that's a time when I desire it. So basically just going through your days, observing and noticing, when do things go according to plan and when don't they and why? And when you do that audit, basically you just learn from the data. And then I would adjust my schedule and my plan for the next week or the next day based off of that. And I would do the whole thing over again. And after a few weeks of this, I really got a good idea of like, what is my natural flow of energy and how do I like to spend my days? How long of a morning routine do I like to have? Or like, what time do I really usually, like to eat by? And like, for example, like even within my morning routine, I used to be like, get up, go outside and walk, or no, I would like get up, meditate, eat breakfast, walk, whatever, right? I noticed that I really actually, I was getting up and I would like go outside immediately. And then I felt way more motivated. And I noticed that I also like to walk right after I eat. And so things like that. So then instead of, and I know it sounds small, right? But then instead of like planning to get up, eat, and then walk, I would plan like, okay, get up, walk, and then eat. Little things like that, just helping me. Because again, you don't need to plan that specifically, right? It's all according to like what level of structure serves you the best. But for me, it's really helpful to know exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm getting up, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. But also basically know that I, give myself that permission to flow within it. And so it's kind of a way that I hack it to like allow my natural intuitive flow to dictate the structure that I give to myself. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I'm telling myself what I want to do and then I tell myself what to do, but it's based off of what I already told myself I want to do, if that makes sense. So take what resonates, of course, leave what doesn't. I know I'm throwing a lot at you with this. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, well, actually, no, there's like 3 more things. Okay, the last things I want to say is look at your relationship with structure. So if you're finding that your time management and your planning and your structure is like not going well, right? There might be a deeper underlying thing with your relation, like with your masculine energy and your relationship to structure. And another reason why you're resisting. Also, again, looking at, the reasons why you may be procrastinating a certain activity, right? And looking to the blocks there. So just like a little note on like procrastination in general. And like, if this is not working, really like looking energetically to your, your masculine energy and your relationship to healthy structure and what kind of subconscious beliefs you might have around it or have around time can be really important and beneficial as well. So just want to touch on that. And then we talked about cycle syncing already a little bit, right? And just being flexible to your energy, listening to your body and kind of being aware of, certain points in your cycle, taking advantage of I might have less energy, I might have more energy, and really being aware and like building that flexibility into your schedule. And also like, again, taking advantage of when you're going to have probably more energy at a certain point in your cycle, plan more for that, like go all in for sure. And when you know that you're going to be more tired and not have as much energy, take more off your plate. Again, and it's all just like having that relationship with yourself and your body so that you can just like lower the expectations, honestly, because that's really what leads to the pressure and the overwhelm and the stress. And then that leads to inaction. And then the last piece on, building in healthy structure into your day is, again, just recognizing what helps you and what supports you and what kind of structure serves you the best, right? So another personal example, something that I realize really helps me is I am way more motivated throughout the day if I leave the house early in the day, right? The longer I go in the day without leaving the house or interacting with people, the less motivated I feel, the lower energy I am. I get energy from like going out and interacting, even in just a small way. So I, as much as possible, will try to build that in, whether that's just going on my walk in the morning, stopping by a coffee shop in the morning, waving to strangers, going to a yoga class in the morning, or something like that, even just like calling someone in the morning. I notice that that really serves me. And so I will intentionally, purposely build that into my day. I know that changing my environment is something that's really helpful. So if I know that I have a task that I'm more prone to procrastinate, I'll make sure I have these things in place. Like, okay, I'm going to go to the coffee shop and then I'm going to work on this thing, right? Because if I'm just like at home and I'm trying to work on it, right, I don't have enough of a trigger to kind of like flip me into that new mindset and that new energy. So this is really all about just like, again, intuitive scheduling. And it's a very, very much a process of learning what works for you, experimenting, gathering data, assessing and addressing, listening to your intuition, knowing what kind of structure supports you the most and what kind of structure, does more harm than good and doesn't actually help you, how much you like to plan, how much you need to plan, how long different things take, how different activities affect your energy and everything like that. There's so much more I could say on this, but I've already been talking for almost 40 minutes. So I feel like we got a nice thorough, what even is the word? A nice thorough look at intuitive scheduling and time and energy management. You can like take as much of that again, or leave as much of that, like whatever feels good to you. But really what I would say is just at the bare minimum, just start to like notice, in terms of energy balancing and like how would different activities affect your energy, and just bringing awareness to like, okay, like I noticed that I procrastinated here, right? Or I noticed that, I really was focused on this day, and like just noticing and gathering data, because that's going to be the most powerful thing to allow you to really create a routine that is in alignment, with you and your energy and the way you like to flow, in a way that really allows you to still flow without kind of like being the water without the glass. Remember, like with masculine and feminine energy, it's like our feminine is like the flowy water, but then if we don't have that masculine structure of that glass to flow within, right, we're just going to like spill all over the floor, right? So this is all kind of a like finding that balance. One thing I wanted to mention on the note of the intentional healthy structure, I mentioned like acknowledging what are certain things that I know, like what are certain types of structure that I know serve me best, right? Like I use the example of like, I know for me, like I am more focused and productive when I change environments. So when I go to a coffee shop, so I'll pair that with an activity I'm specifically procrastinating. Or like another thing that I didn't mention is, like maybe, for you, like if you really want to get something done, you have to do that first thing in the morning before anything else, right? Or you're not going to do it, you're going to put it off. Or maybe, for you that, if you're really procrastinating something, then you need to kind of like slowly work into it. So again, it's coming back to that, like using yourself as data, right? Like kind of like a more, tangible way of, like tuning in to like how your intuitive flow. And yeah, like knowing what works for you. So like you've probably maybe heard this eat the frog concept, which is like do like the scary thing, do like the biggest task first thing and get it out of the way. So you might notice that for you, that works really well, right? Like if you need to get something done and you just are like, all right, I'm going to get up and I'm literally doing this and I'm not doing anything else until I get this done. Maybe that really works for you to knock out these overwhelming or like intimidating tasks that you're putting off, or even just like not even intimidating, but just like tasks that you don't really feel like doing, right? That you're putting off. But maybe you notice that when you try to do that, then you end up just not doing it because you still procrastinate it, and then you just do nothing all day because you had this big overwhelming task or like this thing that you really didn't want to do. And since you like made this rule that you couldn't do anything else till you did it, it didn't work, and then you just got nothing done, right? So noticing like, when that works for you and when it doesn't, or if it does or if it doesn't. And then maybe like if that kind of approach doesn't work for you, then maybe you need to take the opposite approach, right? Where you actually start with a really small, easy task that you can accomplish. And you actually start slowly building momentum and motivation by kind of hacking your motivation by starting small and then growing bigger. So that could look like, get up and like clean the dishes. And then you feel a little bit more motivated because now you clean the dishes. So maybe you go for a walk and now you feel more motivated because you've cleaned the dishes and you went for a walk, right? And kind of building up to the daunting tasks. So either way works, But I just wanted to acknowledge that because, again, I feel like we can hear a lot of productivity advice and we're like, oh, do this. But like sometimes that's actually not what works for you. So just really noticing again, like what works for me. And it might be different for different tasks, right? For me, sometimes it is what I need to just be like, all right, I'm doing this first thing literally before anything else. Sometimes I have to really be like, even before I like brush my teeth or before I do like anything, right? Or I'm not going to do it. And sometimes I tell myself, all right, this is your priority today, and I will put it off all day and not do anything. And so now in situations like that, when I notice that's happening, I'm like, all right, you know what? Well, clearly this isn't happening. So what can happen? Like, how can I actually just kind of break myself out of this holding pattern to just get something moving? And then the motivation naturally builds, right? Motivation, we can't just sit around, wait for motivation. We have to create the motivation. Like it comes after we start taking action and after we do something to ignite it. So it's like just finding what works for you and like, how can I ignite the motivation? Like, how can I start with something really small and easy and accessible that would make me feel super accomplished? Something else for me is like responding to messages. If I respond to like 1 or 2 DMs, I'm like, I can do anything. Little things around the house, like changing the light bulb or again, like doing the dishes. Like sometimes I actually will purposely leave my dishes or like a couple dishes overnight in the sink so that I have to clean them in the morning. And like I start my day off on like a motivated, accomplished note. It's like a little hack I use. So yeah, just like wanted to note that, like noticing what works for you. And then another note on procrastination in general is like, if you find yourself procrastinating something, right? Especially if it's like a long-term procrastinating thing, like something you've been putting off for a really long time. This is how I recommend handling something like that. So I'll use an example of my podcast because I was procrastinating my podcast for forever. I mean, I put it off. Like I thought I was going to launch my podcast last December and I launched it this May. Okay. So I think this is a really good example. So basically, last year, when I thought I was going to launch it, when I was like, I want to do this podcast, I'm going to do it. And I kept putting it off. I mentioned this the other day. I think like I kept putting it off, kept sliding in my priorities, right? And finally, I was like, okay, I keep putting this off and it's stressing me out because I keep feeling behind and overwhelmed because I have all this podcast stuff to do that I'm not doing. So the first question, like we said the other day, is, all right, is this a priority? Right? Or is it falling because it's not a priority right now and there are other things I'm prioritizing over it? Can I give myself permission to put this off? So I did that for a while. For like 2 months, I was like, you know what? My priority really is just like this launch that I'm in the middle of and I need to get through this launch and then I'll revisit the podcast, right? So that was like one thing. So if you find yourself putting something off, that's the first thing I would check in with. We already talked about that. And then the second thing is, again, you'll notice a theme here throughout the accelerator of not falling into shame, because shame is, again, it's the vibe killer, right? So when we're procrastinating something, our normally like first reaction is we start to get into shame. We feel guilty. Oh, I'm not doing this. I just need to do it. Why am I not doing this? And that is literally the least productive thing you can do. And there's just literally no reason to shame yourself for it. So it's okay to like feel that disappointment, right? And like feel disappointed in yourself. That's fine. It's normal. It's not like you can, again, prevent feelings from coming up when they're there. But then I want you to practice, like we talked about on day one, okay, how can I like hear this voice that's coming up, that's feeling disappointed, right? And upset. Like, how can I acknowledge this voice and like its complaints, right? But then not continue to energize it and feed it and actually, like come from a place of love and compassion for it and actually like hear and understand like what it's saying. Because like this, procrastination is this voice that's driving the shame and everything, right? Like it's coming from a part of you that needs to be heard and needs something, right? To like feel loved, right? That part wants love. So for example, with the podcast, coming back to like when I did decide to reprioritize it, right? And about 3 weeks in a row, I literally made like record podcast episode the only thing on my schedule for an entire day. I was like, all right, Wednesday's podcast day. I'm recording the podcast today. Like nothing else I have to do. Like all my energy is just going towards podcast. And somehow 3 weeks in a row, I found a way to do anything but the podcast, which sometimes can be nice because if you guys relate to productive procrastination, like when there's like, that's also another kind of hack. Like give yourself something that like you really, really don't want to do. And it's kind of a way to like get yourself to do other things you don't want to do, but like they're at least not as bad as that thing. Like when I'm really procrastinating something, I clean my whole apartment. I do all these things that I have been trying to get done because my brain is like, all right, anything but this. So that's like another little fun procrastination hack. But so basically, after like the third week of this, I was like, all right, clearly there's something going on. Like there's a block here, right? There is a block with me in this podcast, right? And by just acknowledging, you know, like, okay, clearly there's a block, instead of just like being like, oh my God, why am I not getting this done? And just getting frustrated and just like energizing like emotions that aren't serving me. I was like, all right, let me just notice there's clearly something going on, bring awareness to it. What's going on? Like, what am I so afraid of? Right. And then just like let myself talk through it and work through it. I went on a walk and I just like kind of coached myself and I was like, or you can journal or whatever. You can talk to a coach about it, whatever it is. Just like, again, give that part of you a voice, the part of you that is trying to stop you from taking the action. Right. So I was like, all right, like, what is the fear here? Like, what am I afraid of, really? That's going to happen. And I talked myself through it. You know, of course, fear of being seen came up, fear of being misunderstood for like what I'm saying. All this stuff came up and I talked through it, you know, and it's not even that you necessarily have to, you know, like tackle the whole fear right then and there. Like let whatever's ready to move through. But even just the power of acknowledging, right? And accepting, and you know, not even just accepting. I heard someone the other day put this a way that really resonated with me. They said it's not even acceptance that is the goal, allowing is the goal. And I love that because I feel like allowing is just like empowered acceptance, right? Acceptance almost can kind of, you know, have the connotation of like, you know, it's not something that you want, but you're going to accept it anyway. So it's almost this like, there's still a little bit of resistance present, but by shifting it to like, I'm allowing this, it's the same intention, but it kind of like puts you in more of a position of empowerment. I'm choosing to accept this. Like I'm allowing this to happen actually. And I really liked that shift. So anyway, basically that was what I did. I acknowledged. And then I was like, okay, like I'm allowing these to be here. And then, and the most important next part, I have a reel about this somewhere, I think, is I then did not try to force any action after that. So again, I was like, I'm just going to allow this to be what it is, right? And I took this step, and also remembering that step that I took of just acknowledging that and talking through it, that was like productive action towards my goal of the podcast. So I think I mentioned this before, but remembering that like, it's not just that recording the podcast is, you know, like me moving closer to the goal of getting the podcast out, right? It's like all of these things in between that are also steps across the room towards the goal. So yeah, the third important part of that was like recognizing that and then not forcing any action after. So it wasn't that I was just like, all right, let me move through this so that I can record, right? It was like, all right, let me acknowledge, like, let me do what I need to do and let this voice be heard, and then just let it be. And then we'll try again next week. And then I get to next week and I actually recorded the episode, and I didn't have to force it because I just really allowed myself to flow the way I needed to flow, right? And I allowed all the parts to work together, and I allowed the energy to move that needed to move, you know, and I came at it from this place of, again, curiosity, awareness, acceptance, allowance, love, compassion, and, you know, really surrender instead of force and shame and guilt and everything like that. So I wanted to give that note on like how to kind of handle, like move through procrastination, because I feel like obviously that's something we all run into a lot. And I know you guys had a lot of questions specifically about that in terms of like finding things that work for you. Is then after you find those things that work for you, right? Like create rules and ritual around those things, right? So again, this is like that healthy structure. It's like also like, what if we like, instead of like referring to it as like structure, like routine, like kind of words that we might have like a negative association with, it's like ritual, right? Or like, this is my practice, right? Like, what if you just called it like, this is my morning ritual, or this is my, workday ritual, or whatever it is, and like create really, just intentional space. And what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, just like bring like intentional flow, right? Like, it doesn't even have to be structured flow. I'm doing air quotes. It can just be intentional flow, right? Like, just bringing intention. And what I mean by creating rules is kind of like, what's an example? Like, so basically, our brain, it ties, certain environments and certain triggers to different habits and feelings, etc. So really basic example is like, you go to the movie theater and like, now you want popcorn, right? Like, that's kind of a ritual, right? And like, think of a ritual maybe you already have in your life. Like, maybe you already have kind of a morning or a nighttime thing, or like, like Sindri and I will sit down to watch a show, and then we don't really have a ritual, but okay, my mom and my stepdad, like, they have a Saturday night ritual where they do the crossword puzzle, and they get like, they have tea, and they have these specific cookies, and like, they do this whole thing, right? So it's like, how can you create intentional rituals like that with everything, right? Like, how can you make like, integrate that kind of approach into work, right? Like, and into, something that maybe doesn't always feel so fun, right? Basically, like, how can you vibe it up? So, for example, I do live morning practices on Friday mornings. And I created a little ritual out of that on Friday where I would do the practice, and then I would go to this bakery that I like, and I would get this cinnamon bun, and I would eat it in my car. And that was just like what I like to do. And then after that, I would like go to a coffee shop and do my life admin, my catch up, and like my DDD. And by like kind of tying it into a ritual like that, right, it made like going through the DDD, which is like not something I would necessarily look forward to, feel a lot more exciting, and also a lot less like I'm trying to force myself into it. And it was like, this is just what happens on this day when I go through this stuff, right? And your brain starts to make that connection, of like, also example, like, I have kind of a ritual with like my walks, right? I'm like, I go on a walk, I respond to my messages. Or like right now, I'm like, I go on a walk and I do the Hot Girl CEO Summer trainings, right? And so when I go on the walk, now I'm like, my brain has this association that it's like, this is what I do on the walk, right? And so I automatically start to feel more motivated to actually do that thing when I get outside on my walk, because I'm creating that link. So this can be utilized and implemented in all sorts of ways. If like content creation is something that, doesn't feel super fun to you, or like answering emails or whatever it is, it's like, how can I create a ritual around this? And you can like stack, like habit stacking, something that you like, things that you really love with it, right? Like maybe you get a special drink every time you go to record your podcast episode or something, right? And like, again, for me, like going to a coffee shop is something I use a lot. So basically, I wanted to just like kind of extend on that a little bit about that intentional healthy structure, and kind of bring a little bit more of a VIBEY perspective to it, and a little bit of, this is also in Atomic Habits, the environment like being tied to, like triggering habits and feelings, but it's kind of a way that you can utilize that to your advantage. Last two things I wanted to say on this was, one, just remembering, because obviously like a lot of this is about like how to get more done in productivity. And I wanted to remind you, coming back to like one of our very first bonus trainings, I'm not sure if all of you were in here for that, but basically we talked about, if you weren't here, it's not about how much you do or what you do, right? It's about how you feel. So remembering just to always come back to that, we talked about keeping your light on, is like, yes, we want to get stuff done. Yes, we want a balance of masculine and feminine, all the time. We need that balance, right? Of surrender and action, of flow and structure, of everything like that. But remembering ultimately at the end of the day, like, the goal should be to feel a certain way, right? More so than to get a certain amount of stuff done, right? Or to do a certain thing, right? So it's always coming back to that feeling. Do I want to feel accomplished? Do I want to feel expanded? Do I want to feel peaceful? Do I want to feel safe? And something a mentor gave to me one time was, she was like, instead of having like a to-do list of, these tangible, more masculine actions you want to get done, like, and check off, it's like, what if you framed it as, what is one way that I want to make my body feel today? What is one way that I want to make my mind feel today? And what is one way I want to feel in my business today? This is how she framed it to me. And it's like, as long as you're, hitting on those 3 feelings daily, right? You can allow yourself to feel accomplished, even if you didn't necessarily check off every tangible action that you maybe wanted to check off. Does that make sense? It's like, if I did one thing in my business that felt expansive today, that's moving the needle, right? And so it's coming back to that idea of holding the light up, which is really the core of the balance of the masculine and feminine in business. But yeah, just really remembering, a lot of the time, our expectations are just so much higher than they really need to be. And our perspective is honestly just kind of warped, are the expectations that we have for ourselves. So really, really lowering your expectations, as weird as that sounds, right? But it's really it's not lowering it in a bad way. It's just, I don't know how to articulate it, but I feel like you get what I'm saying. So yeah, I think that was all I wanted to say about that. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to say was basically, yes, I'm giving you all these tips on, productivity and focus and scheduling and, how to get, be productive with work and get stuff done. I just want to remind and reiterate that space is just as much important as everything else, as not space, right? As our to-dos. And so basically put space on your to-do list. Again, coming back to that balance, right? We need as much open time as we have, time that is allocated to things and specific actions and things like that, right? So it's really, really important to basically schedule in, and be intentional about creating space in your schedule and creating time for just play and, unstructured time, non-to-do list time, just as much as we do for the other stuff. Because again, everything is, coming back to balance. So again, everyone's going to be at a different place depending where you're at with it. So when I came from serious addiction to busy, right? Had no space at all in my schedule. And so when I first started, trying to really practice and integrate this, I really started with, I put 1 hour, I put on my weekly habit tracker, 1 hour of unstructured time a week of non-to-do time, right? So time that I could just do whatever I wanted, but not crossing things off my to-do list. That was the only rule of it, right? Playtime, do nothing time, whatever it is, but really just learning how to allow myself to, feel safe and calm in that space and in that kind of nothingness, and not feeling a need to be productive or get something done and really getting comfortable with the space and with relaxation. So again, maybe you're already comfortable with that. Maybe you're oh, that's really hitting. So wherever you're at, just making sure that you are prioritizing that space in your schedule just as much as you're prioritizing other things and really making time for space and play, right? So for example, this week, I'm oh, wow, I have a pretty busy week this week. And if past me looked at my schedule this week, she would be oh my God, girl, you have nothing going on. I'm oh my God, I'm so busy because I have calls every day, right? And normally I only have calls a few days a week. I don't actually have anything else, but it's because I've now integrated space so much into my routine, right? And having breaks in my workday and time for play and time, not being stressed and not being booked minute to minute, right? That my perspective and my kind of baseline, is shifted so much. And it's so amazing because I'm able to be this week and I'm wow, I feel I have a busy week, but number one, compared to what a busy week to me would have been in the past, that's insane. No wonder I was so burnt out. I don't even know how I did that, right? And number two, now I'm able to be okay, I feel a little busy and I could be overwhelmed this week. How can I prioritize and and do everything that we talked about to make this week not overwhelming? And I'm now I'm not stressed about it. So just wanted to make sure that I brought that in of making sure that yes, we are focused on productivity and how can I get stuff done? But remember that creating that intentional space and non-structured time and time for play is just as important for that balance. All right. Love you.
Okay, so there you have it. Your daily vitamins, your little taste of daily vitamins, podcast fam, of a little taste of how the hot girl CEOs are scheduling their days and managing their energy and their time and balancing their masculine and feminine energy and all that good stuff. So, as always, I would absolutely love to know what you thought, especially since I know I threw a lot at you in this episode. I would love to hear your takeaways, what landed with you, what resonated, what you're going to take away and try to integrate. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me, send me a DM. You know, I love to connect with you guys and hear what you thought of the episode. If you felt like this would be beneficial to somebody that you know, if you know anyone that is like always stressed and overwhelmed and doesn't have enough time, or like has ADHD or procrastinates a lot or has trouble focusing, or anything that you feel like this might be helpful and relevant to them, share it with them, screenshot it, share it on your stories, send it to someone, tag me. And yeah, just spread the love as always, especially if you know any entrepreneurs that are ready to really embody this hot girl CEO energy. This right here is a huge, huge piece of that embodiment. So with that said, I love you so much. Thank you so much for listening. Do not forget to stop, take a deep breath, and smile. Have a great rest of your day or night wherever you are. I love you so much, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.